You hear that? No? Well, the reason for that is because this episode of Soul Leveling silenced the haters from episode 1. Now, to be fair, there is some valid criticism that I have after watching episode 2. But for the most part, this episode pretty much corrects everything that was pretty much wrong with the first episode's premiere of Soul Leveling. And let's dive headfirst into that, since I know that's going to be, the title. It's going to have probably something to do with the thumbnail. Let's just get right into that. So, why did some people not like Soul Leveling? Why did people even hate the first episode of Soul Leveling? And why am I saying that episode 2 has corrected the fundamental issues that episode 1 had? Well, it all comes down to the premiere, the showcasing of what Soul Leveling has to offer. And we gotta look at, its original form, aka, the webcomic, or technically its original form would be the light novel, but we're looking at the webcomic, okay? Just bear with me for a second. But basically, if we look at the original form, the webcomic, and then we look at, how this first episode and second episode was, it's very clear which technically would be better, what people's expectations would be. And in this case, when you sit down and, you read Soul Leveling, like the webcomic, you probably are going to read the first few chapters, and you're going to get to this iconic scene at the end of the episode where our main character is pretty much left alone in this dungeon, and, the ending sequence of the chapter basically says, do you want to continue? Your heart will stop if you do not click yes. It's a legitimately crazy scene that happens here, and it caught everybody by surprise for the first time they ever read this series if they were not spoiled. And so as a reader, it was just quite a shocking, moment. It was quite a shocking beginning to the story. And so when you factor in those emotions with, this anime, it makes a lot of sense why people didn't like episode 1 as much as they did. And I think this fundamentally comes down to the runtime. And hear me out. Think about, last year, just some of the anime that really just blew it out of the park in terms of just their premieres. Oshinoko is a very good example, or Free Rent. They had, hour-long premieres that gave enough context and just world-building and characterization to know what you're getting into. I'm willing to bet you, Oshinoko and Freerun wouldn't have been such a smash hit as they were last year if it wasn't for the premieres being as long as they were. Oshinoko had a premiere, spoilers by the way, that went literally all the way up until chapter 10 where I died, which was a huge moment that really cemented what you're about to get into for the story of Oshinoko. And then spoilers for Freerun, you have the situation where, you get the whole context of what Freerun lost, the party she journeyed with, and the conclusion of it, and, kind of where it stopped at with Fern and all that, and meeting her, and them traveling together. It was a nice, a presentation to the whole world and characters of Freerun. And I feel like, those hour-long premieres really served a huge purpose of getting people into the story. And so, we fast forward to this episode, or Soul Leveling's anime in general, and I feel like a lot of people that were, thinking about how episode 1 would be, would legitimately, think that the first episode would end around here. For instance, the first episode would end exactly where, our main character is just straight up getting butchered and dying, and then, you're like, what's about to happen? And then, this notification pops up at the end. This is what people wanted the first episode to end at. Now, to be fair, if the first episode would have covered all this content within a 20-minute runtime, it would have been rushed. It would have been completely a mess, and people would have hated the first episode even more than they already did. Because a lot of people felt the first episode, I'm going to be blunt here, boring. I noticed that. When I was reading the comments on, my video I made last week to looking at social media, a lot of people labeled Soul Leveling episode 1 just extremely boring, nothing interesting, and they were just completely disappointed with, what it actually had to offer. And I think the reason for that is because it obviously didn't have the content that people really know Soul Leveling for. So, what I'm saying is that I feel like Soul Leveling would have been a smash hit, at least right off the gate, or right out the gate, if it would have had this episode and the first episode combined into one. Now, obviously, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. We know that Soul Leveling, unofficially, technically, was pushed back and delayed quite a bit last year. We know this. It should have aired early last year, but we know the reason for that. There was a lot of production issues going on, and clearly, thanks to all the delays, Soul Leveling looks as good as it does because of those delays. I mean, legitimately, you can't really deny just the quality of how good, this episode and the previous episode looks. But, I mean, the point of the matter is that I feel like if this would have been an hour-long premiere, like a 50-minute, 40-minute premiere, nobody would have complained about Solo Leveling's anime. People would have probably said that this was the best anime of the season right out the gate, and no complaints would have probably been had, besides those that just don't like Solo Leveling to begin with. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about that because I feel like, Episode 2 really presents, like, more to the story. It gives more about the character, or MC here, to what to expect from these dungeons and the worlds, and what happens and why these dungeons need to be cleared. Like, we find out if, like, these dungeons are not cleared, they will break out of the rift gates and just come into the world. And, like, for instance, you have this creature, this statue that you see throughout this episode that is absolutely frightening. And imagine how, scary this thing is if it was able to get out of the dungeon and start fighting. So that was like the true terror of what was going on within this episode. What was revealed is that, there's gonna have to be a team that is able to defeat this. If not, well, it's GG, so to speak. So I really, really appreciate what this episode does for the series. Now, once again, this is coming from me as a original source reader. I have read a little bit of the light novel. I have read all of the webcomic, and it's a good series. Legitimately a really good series. And I feel like, the way the anime is being presented, now after seeing episode 2, this is everything I wanted, known, and loved from the original, and I'm glad to see it adapted to such a high quality. Like, this smile is so iconic. I love seeing it finally animated for the first time. It's amazing. Like, seriously, the angle and the way the expression is, it's perfection. Now, anyways, let's get into the actual animation and, how the opening and ending is as well. So the opening and ending for this anime is, oh my goodness, okay, visually speaking, stunning. Oh my god, like, I really like the visuals, and I think there's really next to no complaints in terms of visual department for this opening. It is just, yeah. Apparently, the visuals for the opening was done by a Korean studio, which I feel is perfect because, FYI, this is a webcomic from Korea, so the fact that you have like a studio, an animation studio that works, I believe, on games as well, that did this opening for Soul Leveling, it really falls in line with the art style. Like, when you look at the way the characters move within this opening, it really does look like the webcomic come to life, and I appreciate that. I love how this was outsourced to them. I know some might have issues with that, but I think in the end, it keeps the integrity of Soul Leveling's actual art style intact. Now, in terms of song, I like the song. I don't know if it's going to be my favorite song, but I'll have to listen to it a few more times, but I do like the opening song. Now, ending-wise, okay, visually great. Maybe not as, like, noticeably visually great as the opening, but the ending, oh my god, like, the song is definitely way better, in my personal opinion, than the endings, or the opening song. I get this, like, very, like, backroomy type feel when I watch this ending song, and if you don't know what the backrooms are, really, what you doing? Go look at internet, culture right now. I mean, it's been the talk of the town for a while now, but anyways, I get a backrooms type vibe from just this ending song, and it makes a lot of sense, because it's like, this is dungeons that are, like, randomly generated or whatever. Basically, you don't know what's really inside of them, different monsters, and that's kind of like a little bit of essence what the backrooms are. And technically, our main character has kind of fallen into the backrooms, so to speak, because it's like, it was a completely new section of the dungeon nobody knew about, and then it's like creatures they've never seen before that could potentially be S-class tier monsters, or even higher, maybe. But the point of the matter is that, it fits in line with that theme, and I love this ending song. It's a very backrooms feeling. It's the exact vibe I get, and I hope I am not the only one that actually felt that after watching this ending song. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about the story. So, the episode in terms of story content is very basic. It's very straight to the point and all that, and I don't think anyone with a, high IQ, you need a high IQ to watch this episode, okay? I feel like anyone's gonna be able to understand what's going on. Basically, it's about a group of people that got in over their head. They're in a, like, survival game situation, so to speak, the last man standing who can live, etc., and, how can they survive? Selfishness, selflessness, all on full display, and eventually, our main character pays the blood price sacrifice and pretty much dies at the end because he was very, very selfless, even though he wanted to be selfish. And it's a very interesting episode, character-driven episode, showing what humans would do when they're backed up against the wall and when they have no option, you know, how they'll save themselves over anyone else, and how some would even sacrifice themselves to save others. It's a nice little mind game and introduction to some of these dungeons, for instance, how these dungeons can be in the future, that they're not always going to be cookie cutter or straightforward about, oh, you must kill a boss. There's clearly going to be a lot more to it than just that. It's a nice introduction to the world and the dungeon system and how our MC is as a character as well. So, I mean, it's a great episode. But story-wise, nothing too complicated. It is very straight to the point. So, besides all of that, though, great episode. I truly think that any problems people theoretically had from the first episode are going to be corrected with episode 2. That's my 2 cents on the matter. But, I'll leave it at that. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, how you felt about this week's episode of Solo Leveling. If you enjoyed this video, do leave me a like. It does help me out a lot. And with that, I love you guys. Chibi out.